So, I was kind of just chilling here, and I was really doing some deep thinking to myself about what my life is and what I want it to be. I remember hearing something that David Goggins said that really struck a chord with me, and it was getting up to heaven and hearing a list of what God says you were supposed to be a marathon runner, says you're supposed to be a writer, a singer, a dancer, professional mixed martial artist. He lists this great, big, beautiful list. And you say, I think David Goggins worded something like, well, hey, you got the right name, but that's not me. And God says, well, that was supposed to be you. That was what you were supposed to be. And I'm just kind of blown away by how much of a good man David Goggins really is. Because he's inspired me to do so much of my life. But it's not just about motivation, it's about dedication. Now, here's the deal. You do need to have passion. You need to have passion for certain things, right? If you don't have passion, you're most likely not going to do those things. And that's important to keep in mind, okay? So, you're not going to be as passionate about everything. And to some degree, you're going to get burned out if you look for the wrong things. That's what people don't understand in hustle culture, is you have to have something that you're genuinely interested in. And through trial and error, you've got to find that thing. And when you find that thing, you want to make sure, at least for me, I'm going to speak for myself, right? Because usually I give pretty objective advice in the sense of like, here's some statistics, here's what's most effective, right? And I try to mix it up with my own little anecdotes and subjective experiences. But for this is mostly going to be what I tell you works for me, okay? So keep that in mind. This is in no way advice, nor have I ever offered advice in any regards. I've always just been telling my story and listing off things I think sound cool. Okay, I'm not responsible or a reliable source of credible information in that sense. Like, I'm not going to take responsibility for that. I'm just going to tell you what's worked for me. And let me tell you something that's worked for me, is this mentality of there is no tomorrow. And Rocky, I just think he's an absolutely amazing individual. Like, to see a guy go through everything that he goes through and to still come out the other side is really great. This thing about stories like Rocky that I really like is it's about an underdog story. And the reason underdog stories work so well for us is because they're relatable. You take people like Superman, and the reason Superman is not interesting to most people, especially the old Superman, is because he's too perfect. He's a god-like being, right? He even comes from another planet. And so you think, well, this guy's just not all that interesting to me. He's just too good for me. Like, he's just too perfect. He's not relatable in any sense. And that's something we look for in characters, right? You look for a character to be able to identify with, at least in some way, shape, or form. And to some degree, obviously it varies from person to person, but you might even take on some sort of patterns of behaviors of that character. You might act like them or take on the mannerisms or their body language or say things. And that's the same way with our environment, our influences. These are all going to impact us at least in some way, shape, or form in how we conduct ourselves. I think something that people don't understand is that they spend too much time thinking about doing shit instead of just doing it. Life is so fucking short. You have no idea how incredibly short it really is until one day you wake up and you're 70 years old and you're on your deathbed and you think about all the regrets you have. And people think about this hustle culture. That's not how life was meant. You were not meant to be a slave, right? You were not meant to be a wage slave. You were not meant to spend your whole day at the factory. And some people get so brainwashed and convincing themselves that that's how you should experience life. Those people are not going to be at your funeral, at your deathbed. Those people are not going to be there for your wedding. Those people are not going to be there for you at your lowest moments when you're addicted to drugs or you're homeless. These people are not going to be there. Show up, do the work. And I get it, right? But the hustle culture has tricked us into giving out our fucking labor for pennies on the dollar. You make a dime, your boss makes a dollar, as they say. And that doesn't mean to be a cynical fuck or anything like that either, because that equally creates its own problems in the sense of, if nothing matters, then why am I even trying? And it can almost produce this really negative nihilism in the sense of, I'm just not going to bother. But if things didn't really matter, which I think is just a whole nother coping mechanism personally, then you wouldn't be bitching about it. You wouldn't be upset. At the core of most nihilism, there's this deep yearning for meaning. There's this deep yearning for passion, for emotion, for that joy. But we almost feel like we have to submit ourselves, and we just kind of throw our hands up in the air, and what else can we do? So we start feeling so hopeless that we almost just have to say it that way, because the other reality is that this is so unbearable and this is so god-awful. I just can't bear it. I just don't want to for another second. So I have to do this. It's defending my pride. It's defending my ego. Because taken to its extreme, it can result in an early death in the form of suicide. And that's something that a lot of people go through and experience. They don't have anywhere to turn to. When they grow up and they go throughout life and school, you're learning about useless shit for the most part. Shit that doesn't even matter to you. And then you're told that you have ADHD and all this shit, and you're given these labels that affect the way you think about yourself and the way you conduct yourself, and you start believing you're fucked up and wrong. And then you're given medications when you're 7, 8 years old, stimulants that fuck you up further. And you start asking, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? The point of school, and there's great things, but many people, including myself, feel like, on the other hand, a lot of what school does, like that, I laugh at the whole No Child Left Behind thing, right? Because that just takes the averages of students, right? That just takes what typically works for the average student. It doesn't include all the variations of students and like what works for them. And even with IEP classes or special education, it's not necessarily designed to fit to an individual. It's still taking the most common denominator and working with that. And even with the students and the counselors, they're not trained with the mental health aspect. They're just trained to tell you, hey, well, just focus in class, right? Like, so a student's fidgeting or something, and his teacher will go out of their way and say, well, why don't you just focus? Why don't you just focus? Hey, stop that. And they'll snap at you, right? But even if you listen, right, even if you get a kid to listen, you're not getting them to listen in a positive way. You're getting them to listen through ridicule, through fear. And then they can't be their most authentic self. And they're always walking on eggshells. And they stop expressing themselves. That young, bright-eyed kid slowly gets beaten down and forced into this small box of a person that they believe is going to be acceptable to the world. So they never get to really see who they are. They never really get to explore their passions. Because when they express that they're bored as fuck with the material that you're currently giving them, you beat them down and tell them, what's wrong with you? What the hell is the matter with you, kid? The truth is they're just not interested in most of this shit, right? A kid wants to be a kid. It's almost like we hold kids to a higher standard than we hold ourselves. It's bewildering to me, right? So then we go on to shit like, like beating our kids, smacking them, spanking them, yelling at them, screaming at them, right? Kids need to be kids, and they're going to make mistakes. It's like we hold kids to higher standards a lot of times. Every child deserves a parent, but not every parent deserves a child. Here's a good example, right? Back to that whole spanking thing that I really think people don't seem to get. If you think spanking's okay, let me ask you a question. What happens when your child becomes physically stronger than you? Most parents would say, well, then I just stop spanking them. Why is it okay early? Then it is okay later on. And I've heard, like, I had this fucking complete dick sucker named Jacob Salt. By the way, fuck you, bro. I've said it before, but fuck you, bro. You're a real piece of shit. You're a real son of a bitch scumbag parent. But with him, I met people like him who would talk about, like, oh, well, you don't have a kid, so how can you tell me, right? How can you tell me, like, how to parent my child, right? And that's something that they love to go to. They don't even understand it. They're just parroting out shit that they've heard before as a catch-all, right? They can't actually explain why you're not allowed to offer any criticism because they're the sole expert on their child, as if you doing research and citing stuff about how the damage affects their children. They think, oh, no, I'm different, right? I'm different. I don't need any of that. I went to the school Hard Knocks, right? My child listens to me when I spank them. That doesn't mean anything. You're forcing them, right? I mean, let's give it another example, right? Let's say you beat up your partner, right, or something, and they start listening to you. Does that mean it's effective? Well, by what definition are you using effective? Is it simply because they're listening to you? That's not necessarily effective. A lot of children grow up, and they stop talking to their parents, and they get PTSD, and people laugh at them like, what a sissy, what a snowflake, and it's like, what, you think it's it's a good thing for a child to grow up and bottle up all their emotions? We see what happens when people go into war times with that mentality, where they're molded into the quote-unquote perfect soldier, and they come back, and when they ball it up, it all comes out and explodes out in the form of rage, violence, anger, murder. It's like it snowballs until it becomes a huge problem. Here's the deal, right? About 25% of people in America every year is going to be diagnosed with some sort of mental disorder. And in their lifetimes, about 50% will. That's just diagnosed. And even when they get diagnosed, God knows what doesn't, or what's get improperly diagnosed, or the people who do get diagnosed who don't get treatment for it, or even if they get to treatment, it's not working effectively for a number of reasons. And then you look at all the people who go around with mental illness and they don't even know it, or they don't look at it that way, right? They don't look at it as, well, look how shitty my parents were, and now I've adopted a mentality that my parents did. It's absolutely incredible to me that the mental gymnastics people can do to just not try to be better or do research. You don't know everything. That's important to keep in mind. A lot of people have this knee-jerk reaction, and they're like, how dare you? Bro, you go throughout your whole life like that, and it's ironic that the same people who scream snowflakes are the people who can't even hear a differing opinion without completely melting down. You want what's best for your child. That's what you say, right? When your child's in the womb, you have to keep in mind that you just love your child. You just love your child, and you're just happy for your child to come out. But the problem is, you need to keep in mind that your child's not going to be the spinning image of what you hope your child to be. What's going to happen most likely is your child is going to be their own person because they have autonomy. They're going to have their own experiences. They're going to grow up with their own influences. And there may be things, more likely, almost guaranteed, that you don't necessarily agree with or like. And you're going to have to learn to deal with those differences. Otherwise, it starts to build in the form of resentment, and then you carry on the abuse, and this cycle gets spread down from generation to generation. It's no surprise then that parents feel like, I don't have a connection with my children, and then children grow up to be miserable and they're too scared to try anything. Because when children are growing up, every time they make a mistake, not only are they told they're doing bad, right, but they're scolded, they're humiliated for their mistakes. Like, how could you? You're so stupid, you're so dumb. And it's these same people who have gone through it themselves often, right? That's the wild part about this shit. I remember this story with two brothers, and they grew up with an alcoholic father. One brother saw that his father was alcoholic, so he went on to be an alcoholic. The other brother saw that his father was alcoholic, so he grew on to not drink alcohol. And it's amazing because people of different circumstances, right, can choose to rise above what happened. I remember hearing this quote, mental illness ran in the family until it ran into me. And I think that's really good. You can choose to actively do the work. Nobody's saying that's not harder. Nobody's saying that's not a challenge. But at the end of the day, you have the ability to be better than just average. And I think that's something that people don't keep in mind. Raising a child is work. Just like brushing your teeth, wiping your ass, and going to your job. Just like working out, just like eating healthy. Some people are willing to do the work, and some people are gonna die. But everybody gets to choose. So when you're sitting there and you're asking yourself some hard questions, the biggest question that you need to ask is, did I do everything in my power to provide a productive lifestyle so my child could focus on being a child rather than having to grow up too fast? Because what do we see then? We see where people develop like cluster B personality traits, unfortunately, where they have bipolar, they have antisocial personality, or they have borderline, or they have major depressive disorder, or general anxiety disorder, or a number of different things. And they range on the scale of mild to absolutely crippling and severe. Now, do we have an actual definition of severe mental illness? Not necessarily. We don't really have something like that. So there's that kind of misconception there. But what we can look at is the degree to which something is affecting daily life. And we can determine by that on just how much it impacts on somebody and how serious it really is. I think that's something that people don't keep in mind. You absolutely need to look out for not just other people, right? But for yourself as well. You are only going to get, and by the way, sorry I'm sniffling and shit. My nose is so stuffed up because of the weather recently. But you're only going to get so many chances in your life to make amends. And that's something you have to keep in mind. Rupture and repair is a normal part of life, but you have to make sure that repair part is important to keep in mind. And one thing I don't like, right, that people try to express is, they try to say stuff like, well, all couples fight and stuff like that. Even if something is normalized, that doesn't make it right. Or every parent, loses their temper with their child. Bro, that doesn't make it right. And no, I've legitimately had friendships and relationships, both romantic and non, where I didn't have fights. Or if I did, I did my best, my damnedest, to look at it and be like, this is not acceptable behavior. Because here's the deal, right? You can absolutely control yourself at work. And if you can't, what happens is you usually get fired for that shit if you can't control yourself at work. And then you get your ass sent home. So you can absolutely control yourself. But what happens is people bottle that shit in at work and they come home and then they take it out on their family. Why? For a number of reasons. They feel like they can't get away with it at work. If they did, they'd severely get their reputation destroyed and they would not be able to bring home food. But they also have this fucked up idea that my family will be understanding. They'll know it's not me, and they're not going to leave me. You know, I'm not going to get fired from my family, and they're going to stick around for me, and they're a lot more loving, and they know blah, 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 blah. And they justify it. They make up all these rationalizations, and they don't even realize what they're doing either. It's weird how we'll treat the ones we love shittier than strangers, complete strangers. And by the way, that whole don't tell me how to parent my child argument, you're not going to go up and smack some other strangers' kids, right? You're not going to spank them on the ass even if they're absolutely rude or disrespectful to you. And you're not going to do it to an adult, because if you did it to an adult, you understand that they're probably going to hit you back for that. And you also understand that you're probably going to go to jail. You just feel uncomfortable, and you recognize, because this only works when the power dynamics are completely fucked. So if you're doing something that requires power dynamics, then you need to ask yourself, what's better long term? If nothing else, you understand this is only a short term, right? The disagreements. What are you going to do? Let's say you get, you're a small, fragile mom or something, right? Let's say you're 100 pounds soaking wet. And then your child becomes like 13 or 14, right? They're growing. They're a growing boy, right? And now this 13-year-old, even though they're still not necessarily developed in all the ways that you want necessarily, as far as especially like the prefrontal cortex, they're quite the handful. What, you're going to smack them? And let's say that child, not saying that two wrongs make a right, but let's say that you smack them one too many times, right? You smack them in the mouth or you spank their butt, right? And then they just decide, how about I respond, right? And then they smack you really hard, right? They smack you or they bend you over for that, and they start spanking you. I'm talking, they're just like smacking you, right? They give you the treatment right back to you. That would probably be very startling to you, and for good reason, because that's not acceptable. And the brain registers that as abuse. And the reason it registers that as abuse is because it is abuse. It will always surprise me that people don't seem to understand this. Now, again, when you look at cultures, this can be completely different, right? Like, in some cultures, and this is important to keep in mind, that if it's coming from a place of love and the child understands it's coming from a place of love, like when we look at China or India, for example, where the culture is, and I could be speaking wrong, and if I am, please correct me, but from what I remember, in those types of sort of cultures, or even cultures like Republican cultures or anything like traditionally conservative cultures, they can be, that can be almost positive in the sense that the child can grow up and they can reflect on it positively. But context is important, right? So an example would be like if you grew up in a super libertarian background, or if the child was particularly sensitive, which is not a bad thing. Neither of those are bad things, and I hate that people try to make them bad things, right? But as a child is particularly sensitive, or they grow up and they're very neurodivergent, then that can be absolutely devastating to a child. So the thing that people don't understand, that I hate that some individuals say is, well, I got spanked and I grew up just fine, or I needed to be spanked because I was a little shit. That's the thing. You can't project, right? Say this will work for everybody. This is just a blanket statement and it fits for everyone. In some cultures, it can actually be beneficial. But that's the thing. Is this a gambling chance you really want to take? And you also have to keep in mind that this is only a short-term solution. I'm not saying that you need to have an age-appropriate conversation with a child on why things are bad, right? It's like putting them in the timeout or taking away certain privileges is a lot more acceptable and going to make them a lot more well-adjusted. You need to explain, especially when they start getting older, on the basis of why this is not exactly the best thing. I remember, for example, for me, and this is just a personal story, right? Because people like to use that, right? I grew up just fine. I did not grow up just fine when I got spanked. I was absolutely angry at my grandfathers for spanking us, and he smacked the fuck out of us. Sometimes, he would beat us up, and, he would smack us, and I remember he'd push our grandmother down. He was a bastard, dude. He was a real drunk piece of shit, bro. And, he was just abusive all around. Like, he was homophobic, even though he dressed, it was, like, that's a whole nother conversation, but he cross-dressed for a long time, and he ended up repressing it and felt great shame. and just sort of bottled it up. Because he felt so bad about himself, he projected that hatred onto everybody else, because that brought up emotions that he wasn't comfortable dealing with, right? But he was one of those dudes who never learned how to properly have a talk with the child and develop a close relationship with them. And because of that, he resorted to spanking again. And like I said previously, all those other points, you have to be really careful about what you choose to do. People say, well, I exhausted all the options. But the truth is you didn't, right? People like to say, I gave it my all. No, you didn't. Until you do research, and I'm talking research, right? Like, look up child psychology. Bring your child to a counselor, a therapist, and make sure that just one therapist, right? That's something that people like to do. Well, therapy didn't work for me. Well, how much are you working with therapists, right? Well, how much are you being compliant with the therapist? Are you being open-minded? Is that therapist, does it specialize in the field that you're looking for? Do you even know what problems you're trying to address in the first place? There's so many variables, right? And I think that's something that people, like especially parents, don't keep in mind. And, like, are you in possible need? Like, is this group therapy that's needed? Is it individual therapy? Is there a combination that's needed? What's going on? How's the behavior at school? Are they getting bullied? You need to be your child's safe space. You absolutely need to be your child's safe space. They can't start looking at you as the monster under the bed. So with that being said, all this to circle back around, these topics, I think they're important to have because life is short. You need to make sure that you're spending it in a loving way with your children and with yourself, and you need to make sure that you're getting your goals done. People talk about how fear is a great motivator, and I think in some regards it is. Because we have this thing called the panic monster. And the panic monster sets in when the deadline is near and we pull an all-nighter at work, on our study test. But that's because the deadline is very obvious to us. So the problem becomes, what happens when there's no deadline? Well, it's stuff like being an entrepreneur or uploading videos on YouTube. If there's no deadline and you can't see it, then you just it's kind of in the background. And what people often do is they'll watch Netflix or they'll chill. But even though they're chilling, in the back of their mind, it's like eating away at them, so they never get to fully relax. People are looking for motivation, but motivation's fleeting. Again, you're not going to be passionate about everything, so you need to find what your passion is. You don't want to dip your hand in too many honey jars at once. Whatever your passion is, you need to find it. And when you find it, you need to run with it, and you need to enjoy it, and you need to make something out of it. And it's going to be long-term gratification, delayed gratification. You can't just expect immediate results. And we understand this with stuff like working out or cardio. But if we need to take that mindset with everything else too that we do, whether it be saving up for an item, or it be going to work, or it be whatever, we need to keep this in mind, or we're trying to become a popular YouTuber. Keep in mind that it's going to take time. And I think that's something that people don't understand. Fear can be an effective motivator, but it's not the only motivator. We also have to understand that the worse something feels for us sometimes, the better it is for us. Or the harder it is, the better it's going to be for us. In the sense of, if you don't ever break a sweat when you're running, you're never going to get more and more cardiovascular fitness. If people were only, if fear was the best motivator, it was the only motivator needed, then when people looked at a pack of cigarettes, they'd just quit. And for some people, absolutely. I know for me, fear is an effective motivator in keeping me from doing a slew of stupid shit that I should not do. But that's just the thing. It's not the only motivator for me. I also think about the end goal in mind. I always remind myself, because if you have a why, you can do anyhow. I always remind myself of what is at the end of that tunnel. What is at the end? What is the end goal? And then once I have that goal accomplished, I have another goal set up. So I'm never just, I have a beast inside me. It never gets full. It's always hungry. I am grateful for where I'm at and excited for where I'm going, so I don't get demotivated. That doesn't mean never. I'm not perfect. But I definitely know that at the other end of suffering is greatness. We all have to choose what type of suffering we're going to have. You're going to suffer in the short term, and then you get a long-term reward, or you're going to sit there watch Netflix, and you grow up to be 70 years old, and you're still working at Papa John's as a shift lead at best. And at worst, you end up homeless because you never did anything. You never went to work, you never saved up, and you're just not happy. It's a calculated series of risks, right? Life is incredibly lucky in some regards. We've all had close calls. We've all had to pull ourselves by, get by the skin on our teeth, as they say. We all have close calls with certain things. We all have risky behaviors. You're never not going to have that. People who look for certainty, the problem is you're never going to get it. And we all know that. But we assign special meanings to certain things. Even if we accomplish something and we do it a couple times, we can still be afraid of the next result. And then we almost obsessively sit there and try again and again and again and again and again. Because we're looking for it to be perfect, just perfect. When we need to change our expectations, our mindset, be relentless. Understand that if you never give up, you're never going to lose. That's the thing. If you tell your brain, I'm not going anywhere, motherfucker, your brain starts to get the picture. And it's like, well, this dude's unstoppable. I guess we're just going to have to go with it, right? And some people are going to get it, some people are not. But for me, that's something that's really kept on to me, you know? Something like, I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to keep working one step at a time. I'm just going to get in the flow. I'm just not going to think about it, because if I think about how much I'm doing, I'm going to be incredibly overwhelmed by it all. I'm going to be like, oh my God, I just can't. Somebody please save me. I'm going to feel like I'm drowning, because there is a mountain of tasks I do, not just from working as much as I do currently and all the other things and studying, but then even in my free time, I'm working out, and now I'm incorporating lifting weights and, full body dynamic motions, calisthenics I'm starting to put into my workout routines. You need to understand that life, you have plenty of time. When people say they don't have time or they don't have the energy, you have to be very careful when you use those words, because what you tell yourself, what's imagined and what's not, your brain doesn't know the difference. When you tell yourself you're garbage or a piece of shit, your brain starts to believe that you're speaking it into existence. Imagery is such a powerful thing, and you need to use your imagery for the best. People sit there about, what if this, what if that, what if this, and they spend so much time on all the negative what ifs, but they never take the time to ask all the positive what ifs. And there's this mentality of, okay, I'm afraid to fail, but it's not just I'm afraid to fail. If I resign myself and don't try, at least I know that the status quo is going to say the same. Even though I fail, it's familiar failure, I know what to expect. But if I try, not only could I fail, I could fail spectacularly. It could end in cause all these other terrible things to come along with me, and that failure is unexpected failure, and that's a lot scarier. So we sit there and we ask ourselves, and we can do it, and we're very good at it. We are very good at asking ourselves and convincing ourselves of why we shouldn't do these things. We're very good at it, in fact. And so the worst thing is convincing yourself being productive by doing the same shit that you're already comfortable with. Everything you want is outside of your comfort zone. Because if it was inside your comfort zone, chances are you'd already have it, or you'd be actively working to get it. At the very least, it'd be easier to get it. And that's just the thing. By trying to be comfortable, you're discomforting yourself. You are never pushing yourself. And as a result, you are never getting to reap the rewards of the labor that you have made. You need to start doing stuff and understand that the end result is starting to going to become like autopilot, right? Just like training on the job at work or anything like that. It's going to eventually be easier for you to do. Like, listen, bro. Like, life is not easy. Life is not a game. Life is life. You need to treat it seriously, but you also need to have fun. Anyways, that's all for me. I don't want to ramble forever, but I think that's something that I was kind of on my mind and I wanted to sort of talk with you all about. I don't want this to be a super long episode, but I like podcasting, for example. I like sitting down and having these talks, and during these talks, I just like sort of telling you guys about myself, because I don't want to be a stranger. You'll thank yourself for the experiences. And by the way, even if you fail, quote unquote, you learn. You can take that in with you for the next time. Have a learning mentality. Have a growth mindset. Understand that you don't lose. You never ever lose. You're just learning. You're learning what works and what doesn't. Can't be good at everything. Some things you're going to be even terrible at. And if you really want it, you can put in the time. They say practice makes perfect, but perfect practice makes perfect. You will get it right. You will get it right. And with most things, it's like, I know people get almost this like eye through the needle, right? Like threading through the eye of a needle. And that can feel like, that little level of ability, that level of, or even just imagining it, you can feel how that feels like. And people get that with a lot of things. Allow yourself room for error. Allow yourself to just clear your mind. Focus on meditation. Focus on deep breathing. and tell yourself affirmations. Simple affirmations like, I'm the best, I can do this, I've done this before. Reach into that cookies jar and remind yourself of what a badass motherfucker you really are. Tell yourself about all the things you've done, and just remember that other people are going through this too. Reach out to a support group. Talk to your family for motivation. Pray. Whatever it is, understand. This is not the first time, this will not be the last time you experience this. And on the other end of suffering is victory. Anyways, I hope you find that this helps. I hope you're all doing well. And until next time, guys, this is going to be Cow Kings signing off. Bye-bye.